I mean, literally every dime I make is derived from camels.
That's amazing.
I would never paint myself as a great business person, but, I mean, here we are again, 3 decades in. I'm a dreamer, and if I wanna do it, I'm gonna go out and do it. Look, there's 3-year-old Sauber, he's a winner. Here comes Jadid. There's Moo right there, our, last Bactrian we've got in the family. That's our
Ah, okay.
oldest member of the family.
Wow.
Moo is 24 years old.
Hey, I'm Dr. Elliot Garber, and this is the very first episode of Creatures, where animal people talk business. Today, I'm talking with Doug Baum, founder of the Texas Camel Corps. Doug spent years drumming for country star Trace Adkins and other artists before the camel bug bit him and he walked away from professional music to build a business entirely around camels. 30 years later, he's still at it. Educational programs at schools and national parks, historical reenactments of the U.S. Army camel experiment, camel treks through the Texas desert and internationally, live nativities every Christmas season, film and commercial work, and even building custom camel saddles. In this conversation, Doug gets real about the money side of it, what it costs to keep a camel every month, how a school program might run $800 nearby or $3,000 if he's hauling across the state, how film work can pay tens of thousands, and why camels today sell for $10,000 to $30,000 or even more when he paid $4,000 for his first two. Let's get into it. Hey, Doug, thanks so much for doing this interview. I've been really looking forward to it.
Oh, thank you so much, doctor. I appreciate you thinking my story was worthy of including.
Of course. Yeah, and please, just Elliot's fine. Gone by a lot of different things in my life, but pretty informal here. So I remember we first connected about the U.S. Army camel experiment because that was something that I had never heard about, surprisingly, as an Army veterinarian. And of course, we work with all the different animals that the military uses. And it's not something that we have anymore, but you had been posting about it and you've produced a lot of educational materials and videos about it. So actually, I did some good digging into it afterwards and found out that some Army veterinarian colleagues of mine have actually written kind of papers on it in the past as kind of a historical point of interest for people to know more about. So that was a fun initial connection, but probably won't be getting too much into that in this interview since we're going to be talking about the business and the money side of things and camels. It's not something that many people really think about a whole lot here in the US, other than maybe around Christmas time when they're looking at a picture of the wise men coming along the desert to see the baby Jesus. But would love to just kind of jump in on your story. And in my research that I did before this, found out that you actually used to be a drummer, a professional musician, drummer, and played for the country star Trace Adkins for a while. Is that right?
It is. He would be the largest name probably that I played with. I worked on a music career from honestly the time I sat down behind a drum set at age 10, well into my 30s, and my family was musical, so those genetics just landed, and it seemed a very natural career path. But at a point, the camel bug bit me, and it was just a lot more fulfilling to do camels than it was to bang on the drums.
Well, yeah. So, how did you go from drumming in Nashville to deciding you were going to move to Texas to start a camel business?
Well, no musician makes a living playing music in the early days, and you've got to have a day job. Certainly a supportive partner is helpful. And when I moved to Nashville from Texas to seriously endeavor to have a career in music, I needed a day job, and I ended up working at the zoo in Nashville. I had
Okay.
volunteered in college at the zoo here in Waco. I had a little bit of experience, came with a nice letter of recommendation from the general curator of the zoo in Waco back in those days. I actually went out to the zoo just to volunteer, and they had a paying position open. So all of a sudden I was given 5.25 an hour to do what I used to do as a volunteer. So I jumped and I took it. I was able to do that during the day. And of course, the business of music happens at night. So double dipping worked quite easily.
Okay. And so were you immediately assigned to the whatever area of the zoo the camels were in, or how did that progress?
You're right. In those days, there were no camels at the Nashville Zoo. And I was actually working, the position I had was in the primate department. And I was there from November of 92 to spring of 93. And it was at a staff meeting that the director came and said, look, we're going to lease some camels to give rides as a moneymaker for the zoo. Who wants to do that? And I shot my hand up and I said, I'll do it with no large animal experience whatsoever. Working with primates it's a real challenge. And the very best zoos and the very best primate departments in zoos treat it like it should be, which is with psychology and a very forward-thinking approach to enrichment. This was the 90s, and we were certainly kind of welfare and enrichment for zoo species was kind of burgeoning at that time, I would say. But this guy with a 2-year music degree was not prepared to be in the psychological field.
Okay.
So I like to say quite famously that if the zoo director had come and said, listen, we're going to do crocodile milking. Who wants to do that? I would have still shot my hand up
Got
just
it.
to get out of the primate department. Look, I knew I was
Yeah.
outwitted, okay?
Yeah, I have a few stories from working with primates, but I got to do a decent amount of mostly volunteer work also in different zoo settings. But the scariest experience I had, and thankfully nothing bad actually happened, but we were needing to dart a male gorilla, a kind of a teenage male gorilla, to work up an issue he was dealing with. And we had him kind of cornered in the alley where he was supposed to be and a good 40 feet away or something. And he got darted right in the shoulder. It's perfect, but unexpectedly pulled the dart right out and flung it right back at the veterinary team. Thankfully, it hit a wall, didn't hit one of us. But yeah, I can understand where you're coming from there.
Yeah, I think when camels came onto my plate, I was more evenly matched in terms of cerebral power. Most days I need to be just a step ahead of the camels, but yeah, primates, it was just more than I certainly had any experience in, more than I bargained for. But within a week of working with camels, I knew what I was supposed to do. I was still on a trajectory for music, and Trace didn't have a record deal yet. He would get one. We'd go on the road, big shows, a tour bus, videos, all of the things that a 16-year-old, kid growing up in Texas drumming dreams of. But really, really, when I started kind of working in parallel with music and camels, the fulfillment that I got from camels was just head and shoulders above. And here I am 33 years in, and I'm still completely fulfilled doing what I'm doing. I still play music. I create music for film projects that I work on. My kids are all musical. We sit around and play, and that's far more rewarding than any of those, big career moments would have been. You just couldn't tell a
Wow.
28-year-old kid that.
Yeah, makes sense. And so when did you decide to uproot then and move back to Texas?
Yeah, back to Texas. Really, it happened when Trace got a record deal. You probably should live in Nashville to be a part of the Nashville music business. But at that point, you've got a touring gig, you're on the road, and where you live to me really shouldn't matter. We had 2 small kids, so why not, the family unit, be back in Texas closer to family support. And then I would just commute to Nashville, catch the bus, go out on a week run, a 3-week, a 2-week run, whatever, come back and fly home. You're home for a week and then back to Nashville where you pick up the bus and go. So by 96, 97, I reckon, we'd, move back to Texas. And I had my own camels by then as well. So there were some really defining moments. One of them was on a big tour with Brooks Dunn, a huge country act. And Trace is opening up. We're in, I think, Connecticut. And back then there were landlines, no cell phones. And our guitarist got on the phone and he called a college buddy of his and held the phone up and said, "Hey, listen where I am." And it was, Brooks and Dunn playing. And then he hung up and I grabbed the phone. I called home and said, "Hey, do we have enough hay? We have everything we need for the camels." So my mind was already drifting. And the one thing I know about myself is that if I'm going to do anything well, I have to be all in. So,
Mhm.
110%. And my head was drifting at that point, the very thing that I'd worked and lived for decades was no longer important to me. And I'll tell you this, man, I never wake up. Not one morning do I wake up in the camel business and say, "No, my head's not in this." I love it. I
Wow.
will do it
That
until the
yeah.
day I can't.
That's what we're all aiming for, right? So I'm glad
Yeah,
you found that and glad to hear that though it isn't something that most people could never really imagine getting into or even think of something that could support
certainly.
life and support a family. So how did you decide that, hey, this is something that could support my family? Or was there something in between the revenue from the camels and the touring band?
Well, certainly I continued to play music. I did it on a local or a regional level back in Texas, still made a living playing music as, that's happening as the camel business takes off. And it probably took 2 or 3 years, I would say, well into my mid 30s. There was a really great opportunity that I had that came across my plate. Oh, probably a year after I moved back to Texas. And that was a residential treatment program, a nationwide company, but they took generally adjudicated youth. They might be gang kids, they could have drug offenses, but they were they were visionary. Their name was Vision Quest, and it's, all based on the Native American principle of a young man or a young woman finding out who they are and who they're supposed to
Huh.
be, their vision, a quest for who they are. So this company, Vision Quest, had incredible dynamic outdoor experiences for the kids in their care. Could be mules and wagon trains, which moved all over the country. Could be working with BLM Mustangs out west. These are kids who have had rough experiences, and so these Mustangs didn't have, always the best life. Certainly a tough life out
Yeah.
truly in the wild. So these kids and these horses got together. Well, at one point, the three CEOs of the company had done some consultation for juvenile justice in Australia and had seen the feral camels of Australia and thought they're like Mustangs. They're a feral animal that, could maybe
Huh.
teach a kid responsibility and accountability. All the things that every farm kid knows from growing up with sheep and chickens and ducks and cattle or, what have you. So they bought a dozen camels and kind of had, moderate success with them. The staff came and staff went. And then I just happened to cross their paths at a public program I was doing with some camels. And one of their staff asked, "Hey, would you be interested in coming and assessing our herd?" And within months, I did. And boy, I loved having my hands on. It was a dozen camels, I think. At that point, I had two of my own. So seeing 12 in one place was pretty exciting. And I ended up hitching my wagon to Vision Quest for over a decade. I became the manager
Okay.
for their camel program, certainly managing the herd, but also managing the daily program with kids and camels. And we did camel treks and just the kind of the same template that the company might have done with wagon trains and mules, outdoor experience with animals. And there's nothing better for someone, you know, child or adult than learning compassion and empathy and that there are creatures that depend on you and your needs don't necessarily always come first. Every farm kid knows that.
That's right. Wow, that's really neat. So that became your full-time job then for that decade or so?
It really was, and without Vision Quest, I would be nothing today. What I learned about camel trekking, which is my own business as well, I learned with Vision Quest, with incredible staff and mentors.
And so do you remember what your first job was that you actually got paid for with your own camels?
I do. It was a live nativity, a couple of camels, and it was in Tennessee, so it was 7 degrees. It was freezing cold.
Uh-huh.
Ultimately I'm living in Texas, and Christmas in Texas means it's 70, 75. I mean, there are some days we'll have freezing rain or, freezing temps. It can happen. But man, you talk about trial by, well, I'd say fire, but trial by ice. It was 7 degrees, and it was my first paying gig outside of the zoo, and before Vision Quest had come into my life. And the main thing I learned from that night is the warmest place to put your hands on a camel. And your viewers and your listeners are going to appreciate this. But it's right between the back legs under the tail. You wedge your hands in there and your
I can
hands
believe
don't
it.
get frostbite. Yeah. I'm sure nomads in Central Asia have known that. I learned it really quickly on my first paying nativity.
Okay, got it. And so going from that first paid nativity scene to now, what are the different kind of camel related income streams that you have today?
Well, mine is probably a little different from most who are making a living with camels in America. The majority of folks who are working their camels and making a living, they're giving rides at fairs, at festivals, at public events or private events. I did that in the beginning. That's how I started, right? Walking in
Mhm.
circles at the Nashville Zoo. But it was that U.S. Army camel experiment that you referenced earlier that really put me on a trajectory. As a
Hmm.
lifelong Texan and a fan of history, I'd never heard that story. And now, two things I love, camels and history, intersect. And I remember reading a book I'd been given at Christmas of '93. I'd probably been working with camels for 6 months at that point, but I read that book about the Army camel experiment of the 1850s. I shut the book and I thought what Elliot may be the only original thought I've ever had, and that was, I've got to move home to Texas and tell this story. So it was really the U.S. Army Camel experiment, which gives my business its name, the Texas Camel Corps, like
Mhm.
Marine Corps or Peace Corps, its name. And everything I've done has really been kind of a springboard from that. So telling that Army story, whether it's at schools, libraries, museums, national parks, historical sites, that makes up a good part of my year. And I can do that, through the spring, through the fall, in good weather in Texas,
Mhm.
New
And
Mexico,
do those
Mississippi.
organizations pay for that for you to come out and tell
Absolutely.
the story? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a huge part of my business. I see what I do with public education programs like that very much as an extension of my music career. At the end of the day, you're a bit of a performer. I mean, admittedly, when you're playing drums with Trace Adkins, you could be back there naked and no one's going to see you. You got a 6'7" tall cowboy there with this booming baritone voice. They're not coming to see the drummer. But in terms of how to build the business and promote the business, I just picked up what I knew about the music industry and placed it on the camel business. Not everybody knows they need your services. So, back in the days before really, pervasive internet presence or social media, I printed flyers and I'd send them to churches for nativity, pitches. I would send them to libraries, museums, schools to try to get education programs. And yeah, it was a slow slog at first because, again, you're trying to sell something that somebody doesn't realize they need. But there have been other people doing something similar to what I do. It just may be a guy in a Toyota Tercel with, little Tupperware tubs with, lizards and frogs. And I
Mhm.
saw, well, people are doing that. But I mean, look at this. I've got, a truck and a trailer and camels, and that's really dynamic. So to say that it, took off like wildfire would be a gross exaggeration, but 30 plus years into it now, and clearly I make a living doing it.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. So what does a school pay these days to have you come and visit and do presentation?
I think everything that I do, because it involves a truck and a trailer, it's going to vary on mileage. A
Mhm.
program in New Mexico is different than a program, 30 minutes down the road. So, anybody looking to get into this I mean, you've got to really, really consider that you're paying the truck and the trailer. Certainly, you need to assess an hourly fee for your services, your labor. Um, If we're doing a film shoot, for example, I itemize it down to an hourly rate for me, for any additional handlers, an hourly rate per camel on set, overtime that may be accrued, and then, of course, the truck and trailer. I mean, that is the largest expense I have. Um, a breakdown on a truck, especially my diesel, it's a minimum $1,000, so you
Mm,
don't leave the driveway without planning for those things. Now, do I have a breakdown every event? Of course not. Do I have a blowout on a tire? No, but I mean, there's 250, $300 right there on a tire. So anybody getting into this needs to think about those
mhm,
realities. So to answer your question, a school program nearby could be $800. It's an easy, 15-minute drive. It could be $3,000, and it's all going to be based on mileage, and am I gone multiple days? Are there hotels involved? Where am I putting the camels? Does that cost? There are a
yeah,
lot of
that makes
things to
sense.
consider.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't help but think my mom growing up was an elementary school librarian, and she sometimes had visiting authors come through, and it was kind of a similar type of experience. They came for part of the day and
It
gave a
really
presentation and
is.
talked to the
The
kids.
big
Yeah.
difference is that author can fly in, rent a car, and, pull out the book. And, my version of that is a much bigger thing. And the truck and trailer, they're key. They have to be in good working order. You have to maintain them, and they need to be in great shape. That's what I
Mhm,
rely on. That does the heavy lifting. What does it really cost for me to show up and hopefully be engaging, and to tell stories in a compelling manner? What kind of price do you put on art, which that is, storytelling is an art. But at the end of the day, I've got to look at the nuts and bolts, the logistics, and that is truck, trailer, not to mention, the monthly upkeep, on camels, and the running of the business and the
mhm.
various costs associated with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think this all leads up to kind of what one of my key questions will be is this the type of business that could realistically support someone's life, or do most animal businesses these days by default kind of have to be a side supplementary thing to a real job? And I
Sure.
think and believe that it can be the real job, but you have to work to kind of make it
Absolutely.
possible.
Oh, absolutely. And, I had to double dip early on. I still had to bang on the drums. I had to go out and take, $100 club nights, $200 gigs here and there, um, to make ends meet, and having a supportive partner. But I think that's true in almost all agriculture. I mean, unless you inherit something that's huge, right? Nobody starts to be a farmer anymore. The startup costs are almost prohibitive, the equipment.
Yeah.
In my case, a truck and trailer. But if you're a crop farmer, you've got a tractor, you've got, a combine, you've got, all of the equipment. So unless you're inheriting, an agricultural empire, I think that most people in ag, and I consider what we do with camels a part of our ag landscape, you're going to have a supportive partner, somebody who does a 9 to 5 with benefits and all of those things. But again, that's no different than being a musician. So what I'm
Mhm.
doing today may look a little different than what I once did, or once I, thought that was going to be my career path. But I really look at them as kind of similar constructs.
That makes sense. Yeah, so you said you do these educational programs for a good portion of the year. I know you also lead the treks both in the US and internationally, and would love to touch on that
Yeah.
just a little bit too.
Yeah, those are, as I get older, I'm 58 years old. As I get older, guiding trips abroad is much more accessible for my body, for my health, for my stamina, and for economics. What do I need? What are the logistics to run a trip in Tunisia or Egypt or India or Turkey? Well, I need a plane ticket. I need knowledge. I need connections. I've been guiding tours internationally for well over 2 decades, so I've got all of those things. And in fact, as that ramps up, and I do more and more trips abroad every year, It means that I do a fewer treks with my own camels here in Texas,
Okay.
but that's fine. It still feeds my soul. I am at my happiest when I'm walking in the desert with a string of my camels looking back at, satisfied people. I love
Mhm.
doing that. But you do have the wear and tear on truck and trailer. It's 500 miles from my farm in central Texas to the desert where I guide. So I do it seasonally. I do it very much in a limited way, but it keeps me fulfilled because I love doing it. But outside of the country, man, when I'm gone, my camels get to hang out and just kind of be on sabbatical, and the truck and trailer sits in the driveway. So
Uh,
yeah, that's another component to my income between the trips and treks, school programs, nativities, that and education. I mean, certainly in my role as the education chair for North American Camel Ranch Owners Association, which is a volunteer position, I should add. But it keeps me busy, but it does put me in situations that, can lead to other, business endeavors, maybe consulting, and I end up building saddles for somebody. I've always
okay.
done that. It's not a huge part of my business, but I love saddlery.
Okay.
So that satisfies other parts of
Yeah.
my personality and the business. And I do, help folks train camels. It's there. It's not a huge part of my business, but it does happen. I'm the director of the longest running, uh, largest camel gathering in America. We're in our 18th year, the Southwest Camel Conference and Training Clinic. We have 10 to 20 camels show up each year and 60 to 80 people. And there is a part of my income, obviously. I share that with other trainers.
Mhm.
But that's,
Okay.
I mean, literally every dime I make is derived from camels.
That's amazing.
I know
Yeah.
everybody feels that way, but there are easier ways to make money with camel. I wouldn't say easier, but there are more financially advantageous ways to work with camels. Go get yourself some contracts at zoos or festivals or whatever and give rides. You'll make a lot of money. It's just
Okay.
not what I want to do.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah, so going back to the international treks, just because I love to travel also and have lived around the world and have done a few little camel treks in various spots in the Rajasthan desert in India. I woke up one Christmas morning on a camel trek out in the desert and down through Jordan and Egypt as well. I think that's something not really kind of related to what I'm ever planning to do myself, but I think that there could be kind of a growing interest in that type of animal related tourism. Even I think there's already a lot of wildlife related tourism like that, but there are so many people here in the US who are connected to agricultural animals and livestock type of thing who I think could be really interested in going and seeing how that works and learning from those industries in different parts of the world. And it's not something I've seen a lot of. I breed, Highland cattle, and I know that there is maybe one company that is doing some like Highland cattle tours in Scotland that you actually go and meet the real breeders there and
Oh, I
meet their
love that.
cattle and things like that. But I haven't seen a whole lot more like that. So I think it's a fascinating kind of concept.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got goat yoga in America.
uh,
People are being creative with what they have, and in a lot of cases, creating business, creating demand for it. I am not the first camel trek outfit in America. I'm the only camel trekking outfit in America. It's a ton of. I
uh,
would say that in general, it's easier to take 3 or 4 camels to an event and give rides and walk in circles. What I do as a camel trek guide, I'm setting up camp. I've got assistants. I've got helpers there. Generally people who are helpful with camels. Hopefully, they also have some desert ecology or botany or science or history
mhm.
background. I try to put together a really robust experience, and it's a lot of hard work. Would I like to see other camel trek companies in America? Yeah, it's good for everybody when you have, something good happening over here and you can tie it to something else happening. I mean, I think this is year 29 for me, and there's Still nobody out there doing it. Now, that
Yeah.
said, there are people who now have camels just for pleasure in
Mhm.
America. We've got folks in our camel community who have pleasure camels, just like somebody goes, trail riding on their horses. So our community has grown to the point, I think this is a great point, that camels
Mm.
no longer have to be looked at as a revenue stream. Somebody can simply have a camel for pleasure.
Mhm.
And 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that wasn't the case. It's like, my gosh, this thing's expensive. How do I justify it? Well, I'll have a petting zoo or I'll do live nativities or whatever. We've got
Yeah.
folks who have camels now for land management. They truly
Mm.
have camels to knock out invasive species
Mm.
of plants that maybe inhibit grass growth for cattle. So we're seeing that. Our community is absolutely growing.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I think it's a great comparison to a horse or something. No one feels like they have to justify having a horse. So you
Absolutely.
shouldn't
It's okay to have
have,
a
yeah.
camel just for your pleasure. I know the
Uh,
focus of our talk is business with animals. Maybe I can be inspiring. Maybe I can be helpful. I would never paint myself as a great business person. But, I mean, here we are again, 3 decades in. Knock
yeah,
on wood,
you're
it seems
making
to
it
be
work.
working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so last part on kind of the specifics of the camel ways to make revenue from them here in the US. Of course, the first thing people think of are the live nativities. And I've seen your posts the last couple of years. You kind of do a fun live updates of your Christmas season. I think this year it was something like 50 or 60 different events you
It
had in the
feels
course of
like it.
December.
Yeah, most years we're between 2 dozen and 3 dozen, and that means that there are nights that we're 2 and 3 places, but
Mhm.
fortunately, it is a family business. Now, it's not every family member's business, it's mine, but at Christmas time, we have our family traditions, and your family may go see the Nutcracker. Our family provides the holiday memory for folks. So there will be a couple of nights in the season between Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's our season. That we may have 2 or 3 of us out in different places. It doesn't
Wow.
happen every night. And as I get older and my children grow up and have their own lives and careers, it happens less and less.
Mhm.
But we're about to the point now where we can manage it with a couple, trucks and trailers out at any given
Okay.
time. And most nights it's me, 3 camels, a donkey, some sheep, a baby. You know the deal.
And so do you bring the donkeys and sheep as well then?
Every event is different. Always, I'm going to have camels there. But some churches will say, hey, can you bring sheep and goats? Can you bring a calf? Can you bring a donkey? Rural churches may have somebody in the congregation who's they've got a 4-H kid and they've got sheep or goat or a
Mhm.
calf or a donkey. We can do it. So yeah, on my farm, it's not just camels. We have sheep,
Oh,
goats,
okay.
donkeys, and cattle, which may not be a great business plan. You need those animals 4 weeks out of the year, but you feed them all year. You vaccinate them, you do all of that. But at the end of the
Well,
day, man, the animals on our farm are family members. And I used to say that if business dried up, nothing would change. I'd still have my animals. I'd go out and I would love on them. And when COVID hit, I got to put my money where my mouth was. I had 9 months of no
mm,
work.
mhm.
And honestly, it was a blessing in disguise, but it meant that each day I just went out and I spent time with my animals and really rediscovered the love and the passion for what put me on this path in the first place.
That's amazing, yeah. And so I assume then the nativities you would price similarly based on kind of distance from you and the time involved, is that right?
Of
So
course,
kind
yeah,
of
it's all a truck and a
yeah.
trailer, whether I'm wearing a 19th century US Army uniform or that of a simple shepherd in Bethlehem. The truck and trailer are primary. Now, in the
Yeah.
South, you can work nonstop every night through the holiday season, but that's not maybe necessarily the case in the Northeast,
Mhm.
maybe on the West Coast. I don't think it is. But yeah, I mean, I do my countdown on social media. It's like, okay, one down, 29 to go. Night after night after night. I thank the church. I thank the family member that ends up helping. And I thank the camels, donkey, sheep, goat, and cow, by
Uh-huh.
name, who made tonight happen.
Yeah, and so that would be on average around like 1,000 to 3 or $4,000 per event or
Certainly, yeah,
so,
I know
or
that's a
what?
wide spread, but it
Yeah,
just depends on mileage, it depends on the number of animals, depends on the number of helpers.
okay.
Yes, I pay the family, I've got, adult children who, maybe they take an hour and a half off of work, to meet me at a church nearby where they live. I'm sure they could argue that I don't pay as well as their day job, but it's a family tradition, something we've grown up doing. And my oldest, Vanessa, said that if I stopped everything today, she's got her favorite events that are her family tradition,
Mhm.
her holiday tradition. She said,
Huh.
I'll keep that one. I'll make sure we keep doing that one. And I
That's
mean,
great.
how rewarding is that for me as a father? Forget the business
Yeah, that's the
aspect,
dream.
but it's that my kids enjoy, maybe to some degree, the things that I have, bullied them and forced them into doing throughout their lives.
Yeah, that's really the dream, huh? Well, good for you for making that work. Do you remember what the most you've ever made from a single event or gig that you've done, whether it was filming a movie or
Film
whatever?
work. Yeah,
Okay.
film work. And the funny thing about film work is those of us who provide animals for film, it doesn't matter what we charge. It does not matter. We will always be the cheapest thing on set.
Hmm.
Right? Because Tom Cruise is going to make 34 million in a film. The caterer, those guys get paid really well. So again, film work, it pays great. Uh, doesn't happen as often as maybe you'd like because you kind of like to get 3 or 4 of those productions a year, but it's good pay. It's really
Yeah.
good pay, but it's a lot of sitting around and waiting. And then of
Mhm.
course you're going to shoot a scene multiple times, multiple angles. The cameras move. You want to get it from this character's point of view, or this time we're doing it with a thing strapped to the head of the camel. So you're doing the same thing over and over, and schedules don't always line up. We may be ready on set at 5 a.m. and then some other scene takes longer, and it's like, well, you're tabled to the next day. And, meanwhile, you're there, your camel's ready, you're saddled, you're ready, and you get pushed off. So it can be a little frustrating work, but I think anybody in the film industry, I mean, seriously in the film industry that just makes their living off of that, they would say it's a good living.
Yeah, okay. So is that more in the kind of tens of thousands range that you would expect for
Easily, easily,
okay.
and
Hmm,
it depends on how long the shoot is. The first feature we ever did was 3 months of shooting,
okay,
and that was, 3 or 4 days a week, the camels were involved in that. A commercial photo shoot or some social media, short video, those things are not gonna be quite as lucrative, but, film tends to be a little longer commitment. Commitment, you've got, kind of a bigger machine that is required for that. And I'm shooting in Texas, which really is pretty much third coast. New York and LA,
yeah.
that's a whole different animal, and those guys are
Okay,
making, I mean, tens of thousands. That's for answering the phone, probably.
okay, wow. So could we recognize you or your camels in any movies people might have heard of?
Yeah, Texas Funeral was the feature I was referencing.
Okay,
It's the first and only feature I've ever been in. I've done more TV stuff or promotional things, commercial things, Toyota, things like that, national
okay,
ads. Texas Funeral starred Martin Sheen. There'd be a name you'd know,
okay, cool.
Olivia
Have to look it
Diabo.
up. Yeah.
Let's see, Robert Patrick, he would be a face most folks would know from, like, Terminator 2. Martin Sheen would be the big name, obviously, and it
Okay.
was fun. It was great fun. We probably had 5 or 6 camels on that shoot, and 3 months of film work. It was really exciting and thrilling.
That's great. Well, so how many camels do you have yourself now?
I've got 10 camels.
Okay.
And they range in age from 12 days old to
Uh, Congrats.
24. Yeah, so quite an
Okay.
age range.
Yeah, I was gonna follow up with, have you ever bred any yourself? But it sounds like that's a yes if you have a, a newborn.
Yeah, we've had babies over the years. I don't breed camels for sale. I'm not in the camel business for selling
Mm,
camels. Every camel we get, I need. I use it for
okay.
education programs, nativities,
Mhm.
ultimately trekking, things like that. And they are, I mean, they're valued members of the family.
Yeah. That makes sense, and I imagine there's kind of a whole spectrum in terms of the value of camels in the US these days based on their age and sex and training and all
Yeah,
that.
all of that, all of that. I mean, when I started with camels, my first 2 camels cost me $4,000 each, all right?
Wow,
2
okay.
young geldings I had trained. They were great, great camels. I mean, full service, anything you wanted to do, and they were $4,000. Well, here I am 3 decades later, and I still kinda get my nose twisted when people talk about 10 and 20 and $30,000 camels. I'm like, "Wait, camels should be $4,000." So again, I'm not the guy to talk to about, buying and
Uh-huh.
selling camels. I probably can't guide folks very knowledgeably on that. But the real prices today are you're going to be like 10 to 20 to $30,000. And yeah, that's all going to be based on age, sex, species. Is it male? Is it female? Is it young? Is it old? Is it Bactrian? Is it dromedary? Is it trained? Is it untrained? So,
Mhm.
the cheapest camel you're going to find these days in America, right around the $10,000 mark. What's that get you? Well, it's probably going to be a yearling male with one hump and virtually no handling, no training. Now, there can be
Mhm.
exceptions, but yeah, anybody looking to get into the camel business, that's kind of your threshold. And I wouldn't say that 10 grand is the threshold because camels need to live with other camels. So you're probably, in my opinion, from a welfare uh, standpoint, if you look at, the herds of camels that people have owned and managed for millennia, I'm not talking about vanity here in America. I want a camel. You're probably looking at $30,000 just to enter today to buy 3 camels, so that they're mentally
Mhm.
well off and physically, they have to have same species interaction. So yeah, the threshold certainly may be prohibitive for some.
Makes sense, yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
$30,000 is a lot of money for me. Maybe for the next
For
guy,
most
it's
people,
not.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, moving into the just a couple questions about how you kind of market your business and yourself in this. I know you've gotten a lot of media coverage over the years, and I have to imagine that's kind of a combination of the fact that you're doing something so unique and makes for such a compelling story that people want to cover. But is that something you've ever kind of gone after as a way to market the business too?
Yeah, I referenced earlier that those of us with camels or unique jobs, sometimes we have to create the market. Like somebody doesn't
Mhm.
wake up this morning thinking, I need a camel for, this event or that. I mean, certainly if somebody's thinking, oh, I've got a high school prom and it's Arabian Nights theme, they may say, well, how about 2 camels standing out front of the hotel? But in general, most of what I do, people don't realize they need. So I had to create that awareness. But again, it seemed like an easy transition from the music industry where people don't necessarily realize they need music, right? It's kind of there. So I kept on going with the same marketing. I mean, a band would go out and hustle and they'd, maybe do an audition or maybe send a demo tape to a club or whatever, in the earliest days. And that's really how I looked at my earliest promotion of the Camels, from literally printing flyers bulk and sending them in the mail, knowing that if I sent 300, I'd hope to get 1 or 2 calls,
Wow.
and those
Yeah.
pay off to a paying gig. Today with social media, it's so much easier. All you got to do
Huh.
is have a really good viral video, and all of a sudden people are knocking down your door. Not that I know that. I'm lucky.
Uh-huh.
I mean, honestly, Elliot, all of the events I do, whether they're school programs or nativities, but virtually everything I do, I've done for 30 years and I have a recurring schedule. I know that every fall I'm going to be at this library, at, this high school campus. So, you build up that client base and you take care of them. And you're a good person. You show up on time, you do the thing that you're expected to do, but, beyond that, you make sure that you're a good fella. And that goes a long way, building relationships.
Mhm. Yeah, that's true in any industry for sure.
It certainly should be, right? Who do we do business with? The people that, we feel comfortable with and we trust.
Mhm. So it sounds like you're not necessarily needing to try to go out on Instagram or TikTok and get those viral videos these days?
Not anymore. No, certainly when I started on social media, I treated each day posting like a job. I mean,
Mhm.
like clockwork, every morning at 9 a.m.
Mm.
Central Time. And the way I figured that would work was, well, here in Central Time, folks have been in their office an hour. They're starting to drift. 9 o'clock, they may log on to social media. I knew there would be captive eyes. I
Mhm.
approached it very much from a job standpoint, a responsibility for promotion. Today, it's more promotion on social media for me to maintain what I have rather than trying to pick up new work. I'm not wealthy. I won't die a millionaire, but I make ends meet. I'm happy with what I have, and everything that I do allows me to kind of feed the other things that I enjoy doing.
That's great. Yeah, so good to hear that. So if someone came to you tomorrow after they heard this podcast, although it won't be publishing tomorrow, but and said that, "Hey, I've always loved this type of animal. It's not camels, but it's also something kind of unusual, and I want to start a business around it." Any kind of 1 minute long advice that you'd give them to start laying the foundation?
Well, I think you could probably tell from my own career paths, plural. I'm a dreamer, and if I want to do it, I'm going to go out and do it. And that would be my advice. If that's what you think is going to fulfill you and satisfy the passion you have to, fill in the blank, then you should do it.
I love it. Yeah. Well, so now we're going to go into what I'm going to call the squeeze shoot, which on a lot of podcasts they call the lightning round or the fire round. It's just a few kind of quick questions, 5 or 10 second responses. No need to explain it all, and then we'll wrap this up. But first one, what question should I have asked you, but I didn't?
Well, I think a lot of folks don't look at camels. They're certainly just entranced by them as a visual creature, as a physical being, and that is fine. You can love a camel, but there are real concerns then into taking camels into your life. And remember, I say camels plural, right? Because for good camel welfare, they need to live with other camels.
Mhm.
I tell folks you can't be a casual camel owner. I mean, I get it. We buy cattle, we stick them out in the field, we get them up to slaughter weight, you take them to market. But the camel is an animal that, in most cases in America, you're going to try to see it through to the end. They live 30 years and they need to be provided for, certainly from all the physical well-being, but the mental well-being. And camel
Mhm.
welfare is a huge issue to me. Camels need to live with other camels. They also need to be trained. They need to be handled. They need a job. They need a purpose like any other domesticated animal, whether it's a dog
Mhm.
or a horse, or a yak or an ox or an
Mhm.
elephant in Thailand that's logging. These animals have genetically been altered over millennia of domestication, and that's science. That's not something that's just
Mhm.
swirling around in my head. There's a reason a Chihuahua is not a wolf. Domestication is a genetic transformation. And you have to do right by your camels. You have to
Yeah.
provide for them. Certainly the physical well being, the food, the diet, the space to move about, but the mental well being. And that's really, really important to me. And it's been important to me for all times, and certainly in my role as the education chair for North American Camel Ranch Owners
Mhm.
Association. It is part of my mission.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. If you had to start a completely different animal business tomorrow, not camel related, what would it be and why?
I think I've prepared almost all of my life for this. Certainly all of my animal career life. And we have, in addition to camels, I mentioned the sheep, the goat, the cattle, we've got donkeys. And Elliot, I'm telling you, I don't know what the business would be, but it would be predicated on donkeys. I love them.
Me
I
too.
got donkeys 5 or 6 years after I began, working with camels, and I fell in love with them. They are endearing. They're insanely smart,
Mhm.
so affectionate. In fact, moments before you and I logged on for this meeting, I was in a slightly different shirt. I was out trimming hooves, right, on my donkeys every 6 weeks like clockwork.
Uh-huh.
And I would have to give some real thought to how I would predicate a business on donkeys. But if you're telling me it has to be an animal business, I would figure it out with donkeys. I loved him. And I tell people if I had discovered donkeys before camels, I'd have 105 of them.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have
I'm not
miniature
quite a
donkeys
hoarder.
also,
Yeah,
and
aren't they
I
amazing
feel the same
animals?
way, yeah. Yeah, I
Amazing animals.
never
The hardest working animal on the planet.
yeah. Alright. What's an animal-related purchase under $100 that changed your life for the better?
This is kind of an easy one. There are salt blocks. All right. Himalayan salt, right? They look so gorgeous with that pinkish hue. And you
Uh-huh.
can buy them at most feed stores. They're, block this big. They've got a hole through the middle of it and a rope. And I hang that overhead for my
Hmm,
camels. I don't give salt blocks otherwise. Like most ag folks would understand, well, I've got a white salt block or a yellow sulfur block or a hard
mhm.
mineral block that you set out, which is great for horses or cattle who can lick, but camels physiologically don't really stick their tongues out.
Hmm,
It wouldn't make sense in a place that's very arid, right? That's a way to
okay.
lose hydration. So I give my camels loose salt in a tub. They can take it,
Mhm.
free choice, but I hang overhead from the rafters of the barn one of these Himalayan salt blocks. I think they cost 19 bucks. And if the camels want to play with it. They just kind of nuzzle it. They use their lips and they get some salt off of that. But if a camel's just hanging around the barn and we're not working, we're not out on a trek or a school program, and they need what, animal folks today, like in zoos, would consider enrichment, hanging that $19 salt block overhead is a,
Okay.
a really cheap and easy way to keep, for me, a camel occupied and they're fiddling with it and they get some salt out of it too.
Okay, that's great. I would never have thought about that, but makes
Yeah.
sense. And
I'd
how
be
about a
interested in
purchase
hearing all the other folks who have, under $100 ideas. That's a great question.
Yeah, and then how about a purchase over $1,000, kind of a different category?
Wow. For me, I'd have to say it's something like a trailer, a
Mhm,
reliable, method of conveyance for my business to move camels to schools, libraries, museums, national parks, historical sites, churches. The trailer, I mean, it's certainly over 1,000. It's well over
yeah.
a
Yeah.
1,000. But
Okay.
that
No, I'll
seems like,
take it. Makes
yeah,
sense,
I
yeah.
think the trailer is important and maintaining it.
Alright, what's something most people get wrong about the camel industry?
Oh man, that one's easy. I was given camel rides at the Nashville Zoo when I was 25 or 26, and I remember somebody walking up, and I heard him just within earshot say something like, "Oh man, there's the easy money. Just get you a couple of camels and walk in circles." And I dig it. What he was seeing was a snapshot. One moment
Mhm,
there was a line of 30 people. They were probably all, paying $5 a ride. And he probably saw that in the next 20 minutes there was going to be, 150, 200 bucks made. Cha-ching. It seems easy. But the truth is, when someone sees something like that, what they're not really understanding is that I mean, every month I probably spend 300, 350 bucks per head between hay, fecal testing, right? Because I want to
mhm,
make sure my guys are healthy, deworming treatment if necessary, the supplemental feed, any pellets or salt or mineral, annual vaccinations.
mhm.
If I do a job at the Alamo, which I do every year, every
Okay.
summer, the city of San Antonio requires that I, have a health certificate and there's a permit
Mhm,
that I pay. Uh, and I have business insurance, right? Liability insurance. So I'm paying 300,
mhm,
350 a head just to own camels, just to
mhm,
have them. Right. And that doesn't even really take into account the odd vet bill that,
mhm,
knock on wood, you don't have.
mhm,
But that happens. So,
mhm,
there's a very real cost, a monthly cost to having a camel or camels, plural,
mhm.
in your life.
Makes sense.
Easy
Alright.
money, he thought.
Yeah. No, that's hard to find in this world. Alright. Well, so who would you recommend as another guest for this show?
Oh man, if you're talking somebody who's making a living with animals and I mean, obviously, I'm going to think camels. Today in America, we've got like a dozen camel dairies, people who make a
Okay.
living milking camels. And I've got a great relationship with Camelot Dairy. Kyle Hendricks, the owner of Camelot Dairy in Colorado, probably the hardest working man I know.
Wow. Okay.
I would
Sounds
highly
great.
recommend if you can catch him between milkings and, fencing, fencing,
Uh-huh.
fixing fence and all the other things that every other ag guy has to do.
Yeah.
I think he'd be a fantastic example for your listeners. I mean, talk about an unlikely job, right? Who would think
Yep.
camel dairying? But today we've got over a dozen, and nobody does it better than Kyle Hendricks at
Okay.
Camelot Dairy.
All right. Well,
There's my
I'll have to get you to introduce me to him at some point.
happily
Uh,
done, happily
and
done.
last question, where can people find you or follow you online?
Certainly, my website, texascamelcorps.com. That's CORPS, texascamelcorps.com. Online, if folks are interested in this quirky story of the 19th century American military use of camels, it would be U.S. Army Camel Experiment. Certainly, NECROA, our North American Camel Ranch Owners Association, NECROA. Also online on social media as North American Camel Ranch Owners Association. And then my own personal Facebook, which I don't even differentiate between what I do for a living and who I am. It's one. So that'd just be my name on Facebook, Doug Baum. But be warned, folks, there can be lots of camels in there.
Well, that's what they're going to be looking for if they look for you.
Fantastic.
Well, this was great, Doug. I think we're going to cut off the recording here in just a minute and then go out and just take a couple minutes to meet your camels and see
Happy
these
to.
amazing creatures that we've
Happy
been
to. I'll
talking
meet you
about.
out in the field.
All right, we're back outside now. You have some camels there?
I do, but who could deny Johnny Cash and Presley, the most musically named dogs on
Oh,
any
they're
farm.
beautiful.
Yeah, they are the early alert system when somebody shows up to the farm. But yeah, I'm out here at the corral just outside our camel pasture. I've got, oh my gosh, look, there's 3-year-old Sauber. He's a winner. Here comes Jadid. There's Moo right there, our last Bactrian we've got in the family. That's our
Ah, okay.
oldest member of the family.
Wow.
Moo is 24 years old. Who's
Okay.
come here to say hello? Who's come
I
here
was
to
going to ask if you had any Bactrians because didn't think you did,
Yeah.
but
Yep,
okay.
over the years, I've had 3,
Mhm,
and as a part of the U.S. Army Camel Experiment story, I mean, you gotta show dromedary and Bactrian. The U.S. Army
mhm.
used both, and I like to, share that with folks.
All right. Well, thank you for letting us see them. They're great.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for including me in this. This is a fantastic idea, and I'm really excited to follow along myself and see who else you get involved.
Sounds great. Have a good one, Doug. Bye bye.
Thanks so much.
That was Doug Baum with the Texas Camel Corps. Next time you're going through the Lone Star State, make sure you check out one of his incredible educational presentations. If this conversation was useful, the single best thing you can do for the show, and for me, is to send it to one person who'd get something out of it. It would also be amazing if you could hit subscribe so the next episode lands in your feed, and of course, rate and review. Next up is Tara Pillanero of Stay a While Farm in West Virginia. Her woolly mini donkey auctions have steadily grown from $125,000 in 2023 to $266,000 in 2025, and she's going to tell us exactly how she did it. See you then.